Step into the shadows with me as we explore the dark history of haunted places and the tools used to communicate with spirits. From the legendary ghost story of Athenodorus in ancient Greece to the high-tech spirit boxes of today, we uncover the eerie connections that span centuries. This episode will take us to the haunted Palmer House Hotel and beyond, revealing the chilling tales that continue to captivate our imaginations. This is My Dark Path. Stories of haunted houses stretch back millennia, and the tale of Athenodorus is a classic one. It's one of the first ghost stories to ever be recorded. Athenodorus was a Stoic philosopher who lived around the 1st century BC. The story goes that while he was living in Athens, he heard about a house that was notorious for being haunted. It is said that a ghost of an old man bound in chains would appear, alarming the homeowner with his clanking and moaning. Athenodorus, being a curious and rational philosopher, was intrigued and decided to rent the house. And once he'd moved in, he set up his desk and started to write. It's been told that the ghost appeared, rattling its chains. And rather than fleeing in fright, Athenodorus held his ground. As the ghost had interrupted him mid-sentence with his writing, Athenodorus gestured to the spirit to wait so that he could finish his thought. And then, with his writing complete, he turned his full attention to the apparition. The pause elicited a different response from the ghost. Instead of the expected behavior of more chain rattling and groaning, the manifestation led Athenodorus to a specific spot in the courtyard before vanishing. The next day, Athenodorus got the local authorities to dig at the spot where the ghost had disappeared, and there they found the bones of an old man bound in chains. He'd been murdered and his body hidden. And after the remains were given a proper burial, the ghostly disturbances stopped. The house was no longer haunted, and Athenodorus became a legend. This story was recorded by Pliny the Younger, a lawyer, author, and magistrate of Rome, in a letter to his friend Sura, and it's often cited as one of the earliest known reports of a haunted house in Western literature. The story is what we'd expect of a haunted house and haunting. It's all neatly wrapped in just a few paragraphs: an eerie, deserted building, a ghost motivated by past wrongs, and a hero who solves the mystery. It deftly blends philosophy, bravery, and the supernatural. But rarely are the causes and effects of a haunted place so easily defined. There are many spooky buildings across the globe, and many with frightening reputations. And we, with curious minds, would like nothing more than to find the spirit who purportedly haunts the building and inquire, "Why are you still here, seemingly forced to walk the rooms, halls, and gardens of this place?" Yet, unlike the story of Athenodorus, we don't have reliable ways to find and talk with these spirits. Still, many people throughout history have attempted to communicate with the dead. Mediums, shamans, oracles, and mystics have, throughout time, tried to communicate reliably with the dead through many different objects and rituals. Yet, in the last 200 years, tools for communicating with the spirits have increasingly incorporated modern technology. And in this episode of My Dark Path, I'll share a visit to one uncommonly haunted hotel and explore the history of the technologies that have been used to communicate with the spirits. Hi, I'm MF Thomas, and this is My Dark Path. In every episode, I explore the fringes of history, science, and the paranormal. So if you geek out over these subjects, you're among friends here at My Dark Path. Thanks for listening and choosing to walk the dark paths of the world with me. Let's get started with episode 64, Talking with the Spirits. Part 1. The Haunted Palmer House Hotel. There's a reason that horror writers love hotels. They're supposed to be safe places where we can let our guard down and relax whether we're working or on vacation. And at a hotel, one has privacy, yet are surrounded by other people. and you may get a few days relief from the pressures of the world with an entire staff dedicated to serving your needs. Yet, with that many people coming and going daily, it's inevitable that many hotels will be witness to tragedies, crimes, and salacious activities. And it could be the anonymity that we expect from hotels, but all sorts of strange things can happen behind closed doors. As Stephen King showed us in The Shining, some unfortunate guests never check out of these haunted buildings, their spirits supposedly trapped forever in the hallways and rooms. Paradoxically, the more isolated the hotel, the more likely it may feel claustrophobic. And this may explain why small-town Minnesota, a state generally known for its pragmatism and common sense, has several legendary hotels with paranormal reputations. For example, the Kaler Grand Hotel in Rochester, Minnesota was originally built in 1921 to house paying guests and Mayo Clinic patients. In 1977, Helen Voorhees, the heiress to the Brock candy fortune, arrived at the hotel after a checkup at the Mayo Clinic. The recently widowed Helen was last seen purchasing gift shop items and then checking out of the hotel. And then she vanished. Though one man served time in connection with her disappearance, his name was Richard Bailey, her body was never found, nor has the case been conclusively solved. And to this day, many guests at the Kaler Grand Hotel report seeing a woman dressed in clothes from the 1970s riding the elevator, only to mysteriously vanish before exiting on any floor. You could also try the historic Calumet Hotel in the tiny town of Pipestone, Minnesota. This hotel, a hive of paranormal activity, was featured on an episode of Gordon Ramsay's Hotel Hell. In 1944, a guest named Charles Hirschberger died in room 308 in a catastrophic fire that raged through the building. A bellboy later recounted that no one could understand why Mr. Hirschberger did not climb out of the window to escape the blaze. And guests in room 308 today often report lights turning on and off at random, and housekeepers tell of objects that move around as they try to clean the room. And although there is only one piano in the dining room, which is rarely used, many guests have reported hearing old-fashioned tunes play lightly throughout the hotel. However, one of Minnesota's most famous haunted hotels is the Palmer House in Sauk Centre. Located in west central Minnesota, the town is home to about 4,600 people. It was founded in 1856 and was initially a trading post established during rapid western expansion in the 19th century. And today it is a quintessential American small town with a relaxed pace of life, natural beauty, and a close-knit community that enjoys many annual festivals, parades, and has a beautifully preserved historic downtown. Yet there is also a darker side to Sauk Centre, which is widely believed to be the inspiration for Sinclair Lewis's novel Main Street. Lewis, who won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1926, wrote a tale about the fictitious town of Gopher Prairie, which, while superficially charming, is rife with secrets, toxic gossip, and busybodies. Lewis cleverly showed how individuals can be crushed beneath provincialism and the pressure to conform. And as much as that may be true of small towns, I think this is more of a function of the human condition, as the same human tendencies are displayed in the largest cities and the smallest towns. But as it happens, Sinclair Lewis, as a young man, was a night clerk at the Palmer House in Sauk Centre, which I visited in December of 2021. The location where the Palmer House Hotel stands today was originally the home of the town's first hotel, the Old Sauk Centre House, which was built in 1863. While it was an important hub for social and business events, it became a hub for less reputable activities and reportedly hosted a brothel and a saloon. And when a fire broke out on June 26, 1900, the townspeople were not necessarily distraught to see this landmark disappear, as many thought it was an eyesore. According to newspapers at the time, the fire was thought to be intentional. Reportedly, no one died in the fire. A year later, in 1901, Ralph and Christina Palmer built the Palmer House Hotel on the site of the old Sauk Centre House. Reportedly, the townspeople were excited to have what was now a first-class hotel in their town. The Palmers lived there with their 3 children and Christena's mother. Her brother, George Brandner, also lived there and worked at the hotel. The new property was beautifully designed and was the first building in Sauk Centre to have electricity. It originally boasted 24 guest rooms. However, guests had shared bathrooms on each floor. It was located in the heart of downtown near the railroad, and it thrived as a place for traveling salesmen and as a meeting place for locals. Later, the hotel owners expanded the number of rooms to 38 with the addition of another floor. Today, the hotel has 19 guest rooms. And while no one died when the old Sauk Centre house burned down, the effects of its role in prostitution seemed to persist into the Palmer House Hotel. Rooms 11 and 17 today have the reputation as being the most haunted in the building, and it's room 17 that has the most horrible connection to the old Sauk Centre house. It is rumored to be haunted by the spirit of a prostitute named Lucy. She was believed to have lived during the 1880s when the Sauk Centre house operated as a brothel and gambling house, and according to legend, she met a tragic end, murdered by her pimp, Raymond, who is said to haunt room 22. Due to her violent death, Lucy is known to harbor a strong dislike of men and is reported to have physically attacked them when they stay in room 17. And visitors in the room have also experienced doors slamming shut and locking, adding to its eerie reputation. And on the other hand, Raymond's ghost displays hostility toward female guests who stay in room 22. His ghost has a particular disliking for the hotel's owner, Kelly Freese. Freese has said she's often sensed Raymond's presence and has been physically assaulted by him on several occasions. Elsewhere in the hotel, other apparitions appear. One is of a small boy playing with a ball, whom many believe to be the spirit of Ralph Palmer's son, Carlisle. Another legend has it that a young boy died from the flu while staying at the Palmer House Hotel in the early 1900s, and several guests over the years have noted that their sleep has been disturbed by the sound of children playing in the hallway at night, even though their guest register shows that no children were logged in on those evenings. The hotel also served alcohol during Prohibition, running the contraband through underground tunnels that linked the hotel's basement to various establishments in town. Kelly Freese, who has owned the hotel since 2002, once followed the advice of a psychic and found bones in the basement. She dutifully boxed them up, but when she returned to the desk where the bones were stored after taking a phone call, the box was nowhere to be found and has thus far never been returned. And others staying at the hotel have also had paranormal encounters. For example, one woman and her mother-in-law celebrating her birthday mentioned that they heard a voice distinctly say, "Happy birthday," while standing in front of room 11. Others have heard their names called by someone who was not there. Guests have also reported being asked for their drink orders at the bar, only to turn around and see no one standing there. And the guests aren't the only ones to have had unique experiences. One night clerk took the job for an extra income over the summer, as her primary job was as a Catholic school teacher. She wrote,
"I can tell you about some of the strange happenings that I experienced. I was a little nervous on my first night. As with any new job, I wanted to be sure that I made a good first impression. I vacuumed the dining room and made sure that all of the tables were set with placemats and silverware. I was slightly disgusted that on several tables the silverware seemed to have been thrown on haphazardly. But I straightened it all out and went to check the bathrooms. A few hours later, I went to double check that everything was clean. When I checked the dining room, many of the sets of silverware had been moved. Now, being a good Catholic, I said half a dozen Hail Marys and straightened them all out again. Then I went to the pub and found a fire blazing in the fireplace. Not so unusual, except that it was 90 degrees outside. I didn't panic, but I did leave the pub quickly and said a very heartfelt Our Father. I figured there was a reasonable explanation, but I haven't heard it yet. The owners insist that the gas connection to the fireplace is turned off during the summer.
The bar area at the Palmer House is often the location of ghostly sightings. Full-bodied apparitions have been witnessed there, and many believe a man hung himself there while in the 1950s. Numerous paranormal investigators have reported seeing humanoid-shaped gray smoke in the room. Al Tingley, the hotel owner during the 1970s, documented some of these eerie occurrences in his book, The Corner of Main Street, which discusses the Palmer House and mentions this mysterious entity. Now, all of these stories and many more are available online, and they reinforce the hotel's reputation as a ghostly hotspot among many professional and amateur ghost hunters. And several years ago, when I learned of the Palmer House Hotel, I realized it was just a short drive from my residence in Minneapolis, and I seized the opportunity to visit it. And when I reached Sauk Centre, it was easy to find the building in the quaint downtown area. It's a grand brick structure at the corner of Main Street, and a plaque adorning the entrance proudly proclaims its inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. And when I stepped into the lobby, I was transported back in time with the ambiance of the early 1900s. The lobby was furnished with vintage sofas, period decorations, and captivating photographs that showcased the hotel's early days. Remarkably, little had changed from the enduring hardwood floors to the intricately designed tin ceiling panels. And as I scrutinized the faces in each vintage photo adorning the lobby, I had a sense of anticipation, hoping to stumble upon something uncanny or eerily familiar, perhaps akin to the spectral appearance of Jack Torrance in the haunting photographs from the Overlook Hotel depicted in the movie The Shining. And even today, as I review the snapshots I captured on my iPhone, my gaze lingers on each image, half expecting a hint of the supernatural to manifest itself now on film. Maybe like the anticipation I feel waiting in line outside the Haunted Mansion at Disney, where the unusual spooky effects happen to make the experience more realistic. And after checking into the hotel, I walked up the stairs to my room on the second floor, and I was most surprised not by a supernatural encounter, but a hallway lined with dozens of video cameras and other pieces of electronic equipment, all hoping for a modern experience equivalent to Athenodorus's meeting with the ghostly old man 2,000 years ago. I certainly would have been delighted by a supernatural experience, but the number and variety of ghost hunting technologies was almost as intriguing. I paused in the hall, wanting to inspect the equipment up close, but I didn't want to disrupt what was clearly a well-planned effort by each ghost hunting guest. There was someone else in the hall that evening. He was another late-arriving guest who was now setting up his ghost hunting equipment alongside his wife and young daughter. And I admitted somewhat sheepishly that I didn't recognize much of the equipment that was deployed, and he kindly gave me a few minutes to explain some of the various types of ghost hunting devices. And I also learned from him that the Palmer House Hotel hosted its first paranormal seminar in 2008 and had been featured in episodes of Ghost Adventures and The Dead Files. He and other ghost hunting visitors would come to the hotel with different types of equipment designed to pick up movement, energy, and even electronic voice phenomenon.
Kelly, then the owner, come forward. She's going to tell you a little bit about the hotel and where some of the main activity happens.
I'll just give you a little bit of history about this. There's definitely some hot spots in the basement. I don't know why. When I've sat here at night clerking, I hear the little boy running up and down the hall, bouncing his ball, giggling and laughing, even though I know nobody.
Ghost hunters have recorded EVPs virtually every time they stay at the hotel.
This is Susan. We're in the basement of the Palmer House. There's a large group of us starting to get some K2 activity. If there's someone here that would like to communicate with us, matter of fact, I know that there are those that would like to communicate with us. Can you share with us? Tell us what you'd like to be called? Fabulous, thank you. Wonderful.
Are you guys seeing the K2 activity right here?
Now, an EVP is simply the recording of communication from spirits that is only detectable upon playback. But the device that perhaps fascinated me the most was a small radio-looking like box that was called a spirit box. While most other devices were for one-way detection, the spirit box has an explicit objective of creating two-way communication between the mortal and spirit worlds. This kind gentleman explained the device's history a bit and how he'd use it to ask questions when he believed a ghost was nearby or listening. Of course, I was a bit skeptical, but didn't want to offend the kind man by asking, "Really? Why do you think that would work?" But upon arriving in my room, I started searching the internet about the device and its origins and discovered a rich history in the attempts to use technology to communicate with other worlds. After being on my iPad for about 5 minutes, the solitary light above the bed in my room started a low humming noise, and soon after that, the lighting started to randomly fluctuate, growing dim and then bright at unpredictable intervals. And this flickering persisted for about 15 minutes before it became too annoying to tolerate. And despite the thermostat being turned all the way up in the room, the temperature was frigid, and the space heater that the front desk had provided did little to cut the cold. And these discomforts finally prompted me to extinguish the light and seek refuge beneath the covers. As I read about the history of the spirit box on my iPad, I wondered if these electrical and temperature fluctuations were the type of supernatural encounters that others sought out when they stayed at the hotel. Perhaps it was, but I was too exhausted to react to the spirit's pranks, if it were that at all. And since that time, I pondered how clever inventors have tried to satiate the human race's desire to communicate with the dead. Whether or not it's possible, it is a fascinating and dark path to explore. Part 2. The creation of the spirit phone. The spirit box, easily mistaken for a simple radio, is designed to capture and interpret the fleeting, disembodied voices that many believe are spirits' attempts to communicate with the living. For ghost hunters, it is a direct line to the unknown, offering a way to receive messages, warnings, and even answers to pressing questions from the other side. It's perhaps similar to that movie Poltergeist, where a little girl chats with the family's television as it flashes static after the nightly broadcast wraps up. The spirit box is basically a modified AM/FM radio that continuously scans radio frequencies. This is called sweeping and generates a series of short audio bursts. And these bursts create a fragmented stream of sound, snippets of radio broadcasts, and white noise. The idea is that spirits can manipulate these audio fragments to form coherent words and sentences, allowing them to communicate. Unlike ghost hunting tools requiring post-investigation analysis, the spirit box is supposed to allow for real-time interaction. Investigators can ask questions and then listen for immediate responses. Now, so you get a flavor for it, here are some examples of communication from spirit boxes that have been recorded. This is courtesy of the YouTube channel Cody ITC. A link to their channel is in the show notes. Let's take a listen.
I'm here. Can you tell me your name? In case, any of your family members are watching, we'd like to be able to help identify you.
He fell about 3 feet above the ground and fell off my right chest in front. Seen it coming around the corner.
Did you get hit by a car? I'm feeling like you're trying to tell me that you were hit by a car. Is that what I'm getting from this?
I didn't see anybody. I just kept looking around and see who was there. And moving on.
You're moving on?
While these spooky conversations via spirit boxes can be intriguing, I am equally fascinated by the novel uses of technology that humans have deployed, even for something as esoteric as ghost hunting. And like most technologies, the spirit box didn't emerge out of thin air. It was initially named Frank's box after its modern-day designer, Frank Sumption. But before I share more about Frank's history, I think it's worth exploring about the different types of technologies that have been used to communicate with the spirits of the dead and see how that long history has intertwined with the history of spiritualism. Spiritualism can trace its roots back to the 1840s in America, with a date of March 31st, 1848, often cited as the actual birth date of the movement. This is the day that Kate and Margaret Fox reported making contact with a spirit. Their story appeared in newspapers and periodicals nationwide, sparking widespread interest in talking to spirits and ghosts. But even when the Fox sisters later admitted to fabricating their story and demonstrated how they created the sounds that they attributed to spirits, the public's fascination with the movement persisted. The momentum behind spiritualism had become unstoppable. And as the movement grew, the writings of deceased scientists Emanuel Swedenborg and Franz Mesmer gained popularity. Swedenborg, a Swedish scientist and mystic, had claimed to be able to communicate directly with spirits before he passed away in 1772, but he warned others against seeking contact with the afterlife. On the other hand, Mesmer, a German physician who died in 1815, encouraged people to contact the spirit realm and introduced a technique known as mesmerism to aid in the process. Mesmerism, which requires significant amounts of showmanship, became a popular entertainment in playhouses and theaters worldwide. Over time, mesmerism evolved into what is now known as hypnosis. Among the well-known entertainers of this time were trance lecturers who gained fame for their purported ability to enter this trance state and then deliver lectures or messages from the other world. One of the most famous was Andrew Jackson Davis, known as the Poughkeepsie Seer. In public performances, Davis claimed to have communicated with the spirit of Emanuel Swedenborg during his trance states and delivered messages from the deceased mystic. Like Davis, other mediums would enter trances to channel messages from deceased loved ones for audience members. Trance lecturers became so popular that many grew very wealthy and performed at private society parties and events. Some even became personal spiritual advisors for the rich and famous. Talking to the dead became both fashionable and profitable. Today, individuals who channel spiritual messages are known as mediums and employ seances as a conduit to communicate. Despite spiritualism's popularity, skepticism grew. One notable skeptic was the famous magician Harry Houdini, who exposed fraudulent mediums. And interestingly, one of Houdini's close friends, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the character Sherlock Holmes, firmly believed in the occult and spirit communication. The Ouija board, also known as a talking board, became a tool for those seeking to communicate with the dead. The popularity of spiritualism surged after the Civil War as people sought closure about their deceased loved ones. The board was mass-produced and marketed by Elijah Bond, Charles Kennard, and Colonel Washington Bowie, who founded the Kennard Novelty Company. The name Ouija allegedly came from the board during a session, though some believed it was derived from the French and German words for yes. As the 20th century dawned, interest in communicating with the dead accelerated again during World War I, as over 16 million people died on the battlefield and in cities and towns. As new technologies emerged that harnessed the power of electricity, their inclusion in spirit communication followed. One of the earliest scientists to apply electricity and wireless communication principles to communication with the dead was Roberto Landell de Moura. His grandfather had immigrated from Scotland to Brazil in the mid-1800s, and Roberto was born on January 21, 1861 in Porto Alegre, Brazil. He was a Roman Catholic priest, deeply interested in science and technology. Landell de Moura was not just a clergyman, but also an inventor with several notable achievements. He's often credited as one of the pioneers of wireless communication, independently developing technology that paralleled the work of other early radio inventors like Marconi and Tesla. And while Landell de Moura's contributions to wireless technology are well documented, his foray into spirit communication is less well known, but equally fascinating. Around 1910, reports about Landell using a mysterious device to communicate with the dead began to circulate. The box that he had reportedly invented allowed him to hear and speak with entities from the spirit world. Details about the exact nature and workings of his spirit communication box are sparse. It's said that Landell kept the specifics of the box operation a secret and refused to divulge how it functioned, and his secrecy contributed to the mystique surrounding both him and the invention. And despite his reluctance to share these details, Landell de Moura conducted several public demonstrations of the device. These events drew attention and sparked fascination and skepticism. Little is in the public domain about his spirit box, and so far my requests of a Brazilian historical society dedicated to his history have gone unanswered. And while Landell's contribution to wireless communication is important, it perhaps pales in comparison to two inventive geniuses who utilized electricity and created technologies that reshaped the world. Both Edison and Tesla were as inventive as they were competitive, and yet today we'll explore how they each shaped the world of inventions that attempted to reach across time, space, and the spirit world. Nikola Tesla, one of the most brilliant and enigmatic inventors in the late 19th and early 20th century, is known for his groundbreaking work in electricity and electromagnetism. His interests extended far beyond conventional science and technology, however. He delved into realms that included the possibility of communicating with unseen worlds. Tesla's exploration of this field, though less well documented than his other work, reflects his wide-ranging curiosity. Tesla was born on July 10th in 1856 in Smiljan, in what is now known as Croatia. From a young age, he exhibited an extraordinary aptitude for mathematics and physics. His education and early work in electrical engineering set the stage for his later achievements, including the development of alternating current electrical systems and wireless communication. Tesla's fascination with the unseen forces of nature is a recurring theme throughout his life. He spoke often of receiving inspiration through visions and vivid dreams, and he believed that there were untapped energies and frequencies in the universe which could be harnessed for human benefit. Tesla's experiments with radio waves and wireless communication led him to speculate about the possibility of communicating with non-physical entities. And while working on wireless transmission equipment, he received strange, unexplained signals. What he detected one night was so unsettling that his scientific mind couldn't help but consider the possibility of direct communication with something unknown. But instead of the spirit world, Tesla believed that he was receiving communication from beings on other worlds. He recorded his thoughts about the events of that day in his diary.
My first observations positively terrified me, as there was present in them something mysterious, not to say supernatural, and I was alone in my laboratory at night. It was some time afterward when a thought flashed upon my mind that the disturbances I had observed might be due to an intelligent control. Although I could not decipher their meaning, it was impossible for me to think of them as having been entirely accidental. The feeling is constantly growing on me that I had been the first to hear the greeting of one planet to another.
In a 1901 interview with the Collier's Weekly, Tesla discussed his experiments and the signals that he received. He believed humanity might eventually use his inventions to establish contact with other forms of intelligence. He speculated that the universe was filled with intelligent life and that his technology could bridge the gap of communication between these races. What you're going to hear next are some examples of those strange disembodied voices, much like what Tesla heard that night in his laboratory. They're produced using the same type of equipment that he was using at the time. These recordings come courtesy of the Truth Exposed channel on YouTube. A link to their channel is in the show notes. Nearly 20 years would pass before Tesla started picking up odd voices again when tinkering with a radio in 1918. Now, at this time, he was somewhat more cautious about speculating as to the cause, writing,
"The sounds I am listening to every night at first appear to be human voices conversing back and forth in a language I cannot understand. I find it difficult to imagine that I am actually hearing real voices from people not of this planet. There must be a more simple explanation that has so far eluded me."
And there was a more straightforward explanation that eluded him at the time. The type of radio he was using could pick up low-frequency signals from unseen sources like electrical storms and atmospheric disturbances. And when translated to audio, these signals could sound like the uncanny chatter of disembodied voices. Now, some like to view the Edison-Tesla competition through the lens that Edison was bad and evil and Tesla was good and pure, but that definitely oversimplifies both them and their relationship. But the tension that existed between the two did not extend into spirit communication or spirit phones, despite the desire to extend their competition into this realm. And as you'll see in a moment, Edison had several theories about the existence of spirits and that they could be detected. And as we've seen, Tesla believed that he was detecting or could communicate with extraterrestrials on other worlds. Now, despite being a notable agnostic and a critic of seance-holding mediums that were popular at the time, Edison did become intrigued by the idea of forces existing beyond our world. And in 1920, he revealed to the American magazine, "I have been at work for some time building an apparatus to see if it is possible for personalities which have left this earth to communicate with us." Now, this device would later become known as Edison's spirit phone. And as with all of his experiments, this one too was grounded in science. Edison drew from Albert Einstein, particularly his work in quantum entanglement and relativity theories. Edison's reasoning was as follows: if mass can be converted to energy, then perhaps the spirits of living people become coherent units of energy when their bodies cease to function. And if, according to the theory of quantum entanglement, entangled particles can influence each other across vast distances, then perhaps these energy bundles could interact with our physical world. With this theory, Edison seemed relatively confident about talking with and detecting spirits. When he was interviewed for the October 30th, 1920 issue of Scientific American, he expressed his objective. "I am not promising communication with those who've passed out of this life. I merely state that I am giving the psychic investigators an apparatus which may help them in their work, just as optical experts have given the microscope to the medical world." According to an account in the October 1933 publication of the Modern Mechanics magazine, Edison gathered a group of mediums and scientists to participate in an experiment at his Menlo Park laboratory. The article states, "One black, howling winter night in 1920, just such a night when superstitious people would bar their doors and windows against marauding ghosts, Thomas Edison, the famous inventive wizard, gathered a small group of scientists in his laboratory to witness his secret attempts to lure spirits from beyond the grave and trap them with instruments of incredible sensitivity. Until recently, only the few favored spectators knew the outcome of this sensational experiment. Only the few Edison intimates, assembled like members of a mystic clan, ever knew what unearthly forms materialized in the scientist's laboratory that night to give proof or disproof of existence beyond the grave." The magazine reports that his guests saw a projector-like machine on a workbench, which emitted a thin light beam onto a photoelectric cell. The cell was designed to detect the presence of forces and objects passing through the beam, even those invisible to the naked eye. Edison explained that if a being from another world attended the gathering and passed through the light, a meter connected to the photoelectric cell would indicate its presence. And the article went on to state, When the experiment was ready to begin, Edison called upon the spiritualists in the group of witnesses to summon from eternity the ethereal form of one or two of its inhabitants and command the spirit to walk across the beam. Then, while the spiritualists went through their rites, the scientists watched intently the meter of the electric eye, which would flicker the instant any ghostly form interrupted the light beam. In other words, the mediums tried to call into the room spirits of the dead to be captured by the mechanism that had been created by Edison. However, they were to be disappointed if his guests expected scientific evidence of ghosts. Reportedly, hours passed and the needle on the meter remained still. Even the mediums in attendance had to admit that nothing supernatural was happening. You'll recall that he was famously reported to have tested over 1,000 different designs for the light bulb before finding one that worked effectively. While the number of his experiments was likely fewer, it reflects his persistence and commitment to solving a problem. And while we don't have a full record, Edison likely tried to perfect his spirit phone with the same tenacity. Some skeptics have called his dabbling in the supernatural a hoax, but an entry recovered from his diary suggests his pursuits were genuine, and he continued working on his so-called spirit phone throughout the 1920s. Edison died in 1931 without producing any more convincing evidence of the spirit world. However, his quest to transmit a message from the other side using technology didn't end there. Edison had made plans to continue his work after death by forming a pact with one of his engineers, William Walter Dinwiddie, agreeing that whoever died first would attempt to make contact with the other. Dinwiddie passed away in 1920, about a decade before Edison, and as far as we know, that marked the end of any correspondence between the two. Others of lesser fame than Edison and Tesla also experimented with communicating with the unseen world via technology during the 20th century. A few decades after Edison's death, American photographer Attila von Szalay began recording spirit voices on vinyl records, later transitioning to reel-to-reel tapes. Szalay was a pioneering figure in paranormal photography and electronic voice phenomena. He was born in Hungary and moved later to the U.S., and there he began experimenting with recording ghostly voices in the 40s and 50s, and he's best known for his work with Raymond, with whom he made some of the earliest documented recordings of what the two believed were the voices of spirits. These experiments involved using a wire recorder to capture these unexplained sounds and voices, which they later interpreted as evidence of the supernatural. Friedrich Jürgenson, a Swedish painter and filmmaker, is often credited with being an early pioneer of electronic voice phenomena. In 1959, while recording bird songs in the countryside, Jürgenson claimed to have accidentally recorded the voice of his deceased mother. Here's how this event unfolded. Jürgenson was using a reel-to-reel tape recorder to capture the sounds of birds. When he played it back, he heard what he described as a faint, unexplained voice speaking in Norwegian, his mother's native language. Intrigued, Jürgenson conducted more recording sessions, and he continued to capture voices that he believed were not of human origin. During one of these, he distinctly heard his deceased mother's voice calling him by his childhood nickname and speaking in Norwegian. Jürgenson documented his experiences and published Voices from Space in 1964, detailing his recordings and theories about communicating with the dead. Inspired by Jürgenson's work, psychologist Konstantin Raudive conducted extensive EVP research, developing methods for recording spirit voices under strict laboratory conditions. Raudive's publication Breakthrough, an amazing experiment in electronic communication with the dead, brought wider recognition to EVP phenomena, now often referred to as Raudive voices. But what about the modern spirit box that every researcher at the Palmer House Hotel had deployed in the hall and in their rooms that night? For that, we turn to the life of Frank Sumption, often credited as the creator of the modern spirit box. Part 3, Frank's Box. Frank Sumption was born on November 5, 1953, the second child in a large family of 9 children. His father worked for several big aerospace companies, including Boeing and Douglas, and the work required that the family move frequently, but amid the complexity of moving a family of 11, Frank's parents finally decided to make Golden, Colorado their home. Frank was quirky as a child, but loved solitude and the forest where he could feel at peace. In the book Frank Sumption, the creator of the Ghost Box, it's reported that he, quote, liked the murmurs that he could hear around him. It was like the universe was talking to him, end quote. Frank also loved science and art growing up, and he was always thinking and working on his next invention. And when Frank turned 18 in 1971, he enlisted in the U.S. Army and married his childhood sweetheart. And after a year, Frank was allowed to specialize in the Army and was sent to the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama, where he received advanced training in missile electrical systems, and soon he was deployed to a U.S. base in Germany. After finding a suitable place to live for his family, Frank's wife and 4 children relocated to Germany in 1975. The family had experienced devastating news earlier that year when their 4th child, Brian, had been diagnosed with meningitis, crippling the baby's cognitive and physical development. Still, Frank and Norma embraced the challenge of helping their disabled son thrive, perhaps as good an indication as any of their true character. And at the time, Frank and Norma started to notice something odd in their apartment in Germany. It began just as a feeling, a sense that someone was present in one of the rooms in the apartment. The feeling was never one of fear or unease, but rather a sense of just being watched. And over time, Frank and Norma noticed that their disabled son, Brian, would giggle at odd times when he was alone. Their other sons would also mention seeing the white things. Frank and Norma didn't think much of it until one evening while lying in their bed, they saw something walk past the foot of it. Neither of them was frightened by what they saw. Instinctively, they felt the spirit meant them no harm. As the family became more accustomed to what they then called the white apparition, they realized it was protecting them, and especially Brian. They felt as though it was female. And Brian, who continued to struggle to speak, seemed to be communicating with the spirit with thoughts and feelings. The family could always tell when the spirit was around because a calm, soothing presence would settle over their home. And they would occasionally see her move around the small apartment, but she was never visible when she was with the boys or Brian. Curious about their benevolent ghost, Frank and Norma spoke with the other tenants in the building, and they discovered that the spirit had been attached to the property for as long as anyone could remember. This kind soul seemed to have taken it upon herself to protect all of the children living in the apartment complex, but had a particular fondness for Brian. Perhaps it was due to his disability or innocence, but Frank and Norma knew that Brian could see the gentle spirit clearly when others could only catch glimpses. When the Sumptions moved out of their apartment and onto base housing a year after arriving in Germany, the thing they missed most was the calmness they had felt in the presence of their guardian spirit. After some time, Frank was released from the Army and the family moved back to Colorado. And it was in 1989 another tragedy occurred when their son, Frank Jr., was murdered, while another son, Chad, witnessed the horrific event. The loss of their son, coupled with the stress of the murder trial and media, devastated Frank and Norma. Frank, who was already quiet, became even more introverted and threw himself into work. And then the dreams started. His dreams of his son were incredibly lucid. Frank felt the dreams were not simply a way his unconscious mind was dealing with the loss of his son, but was actually how his son was trying to communicate with him. And it was in this frame of mind that Frank came up with a way for him to communicate with his son, using a device that would bear his, and for that matter, his son's name, Frank's Box. Frank applied all the technical skills he'd gained over the years, his love of CB radios, his knowledge of electronics, in order to build the first prototype. He felt that the knowledge had always been in his mind, but the urgency of his son's need for communication drove him to implement his vision. While this first box was rudimentary, the prototype had all the elements that the current Spirit box contains today: a radio receiver, a sweep function, an antenna, a speaker, and an audio output. Today, if you watch an experienced Spirit box user at work, they will ask questions about the spirit they seek to communicate with to prompt a response. Frank, though, thought that asking spirits questions was confusing to them, and therefore it was best to leave the device on and just listen. He once told a good friend, quote, "Don't ask questions like most people do. I think that by asking questions, it seems like we're trying to control the entities. I like to have the box on while I'm working on other boxes. I don't glorify this stuff or try to make it into some kind of magic box. It's a radio," end quote. Frank utilized this prototype as a medium to communicate with his son. Through this device, he received messages assuring him that his son was okay, watching over the family and helping in any way he could to improve their lives. Frank maintained this communication with his son for several years, but over time the messages gradually dwindled until they ceased entirely. Although the messages stopped, it didn't signify Frank Jr.'s departure from the family. They continued to feel his presence frequently, even after relocating to a new home. And it was never clear to Frank and Norma why the communication stopped through the Spirit box. Perhaps Frank Jr. no longer felt the need to communicate verbally. Perhaps he understood that his family, particularly his surviving brother, had come to terms with their loss and could move forward in their lives. The exact reason for his silence remains unknown. Frank's extensive knowledge of electronics and his conviction that he could communicate with the spirit world drove him to explore more effective methods of achieving this communication. He immersed himself in research, devouring any materials he could find on the subject. He frequented the library, scouring its shelves for relevant books, and he surfed the fledgling internet, visited bookstores to comb through the science section, and perused every magazine that might lead to discoveries. During one of these scientific quests to improve his spirit box, he stumbled upon an issue of Popular Electronics that contained exactly what he had been searching for. The magazine featured an article detailing a circuit that would allow his spirit box to function without a human hand spinning the dial. Excited by the breakthrough, Frank bought the magazine, rushed home, and exclaimed to his wife, quote, "Norma, I can do this," end quote. Ultimately, Frank would build over 180 of his spirit boxes, and for a time his fame outreached his business sense as some unscrupulous ghost hunters would ask for a box for free for testing, only for Frank to find it later listed for auction. But gradually he started to protect his work, even while making each of his creations unique. And Frank passed away on August 16th of 2014, having created a product that tens of thousands use worldwide. And Frank's once handcrafted boxes are now manufactured at scale like any other household electronic device. But their purpose, like Frank's prototype, remains the same: to communicate with those who've passed beyond this mortal existence. And Frank's motivation springs from the same source that has driven much of the spiritualist movement over the last 2 centuries: a desire to connect with our loved ones. We may, of course, rightly debate over the reality of the stories I've explored here. Did Athenodorus truly see a ghost that led him to his murdered remains? Is the Palmer house truly haunted? And can spirits communicate with the living through any number of different electronic devices? These are questions that can be debated endlessly. But Frank's motivation reflects the motivation of billions who grieved at the loss of their loved ones, suffered at their departure from mortality. And this motivation I understand. And just this last weekend at the funeral of a cousin, I was able to visit my dear mother's grave in Alta, Wyoming. And sitting in the grass at her gravestone, we had a long talk. Of course, it was one-sided, but I know that her spirit still lives, that she will be resurrected someday into a perfected body. And until that day, I relish the opportunity to, at some point, have two-way communication with her when I, too, have passed beyond the veil. Thank you for listening to My Dark Path. I'm MF Thomas, the creator and host, and I produce this show with our creative director, Don Purdy. I wrote this episode with the help of our new senior story editor, Nikki Barnes. I'm grateful to them and the entire team at My Dark Path. Until next time, my friends, good night.